good evening, or good night more likely, for if you have found your way here at all, you have most likely come the way that almost everyone comes, at the soft and faded end of a long day, with the lamps turned down low and the house gone quiet around you and the whole wide world loosening, at last towards sleep. Wherever you are tonight, however you are lying just now, you can begin, very gently, to let go. There is nothing left that the day requires of you. Nothing to finish, nothing to answer, nothing that cannot wait, untroubled, until the morning. You have come to the 1 hour that belongs wholly to rest, and you are allowed to sink all the way down into it, slowly, softly, without the least hurry in the world. So take a slow breath in, if you like, and let it out even more slowly than it came, and feel, as you do, the weight of your own body settling down at last into whatever holds it. The mattress soft beneath you, the pillow cool under your head, the blankets drawn up warm and heavy over your shoulders. Let those shoulders come down from wherever the day has carried them. Let the small muscles around your eyes grow loose and still. Let your hands lie open and easy. There is nothing more for you to carry now, nothing more to hold. The day is done, and the only thing left to do is to be still, and to breathe, and to listen, and to let a quiet voice carry you somewhere far away and long ago, while you drift down by soft degrees towards sleep. For that is all this is truly, a gentle voice, and a long slow story, and a warm dark place for your mind to wander until it grows too heavy and too content to wander any further. You do not need to remember a word of it. You do not need to hold the thread from one end to the other, or follow where it leads, or keep any of it at all. If sleep should come and take you long before the story is done, then you will have done the one right and perfect thing. And the story will still be here, patient and unhurried, waiting for you whenever you should wish to return. There is no test at the end of it. There is nothing you must keep. There is only rest, and the slow unspooling of a tale meant for no other purpose than to ease you down into sleep. And if your thoughts are still turning, if some corner of the day is still going round and round somewhere in the back of your mind, replaying what was said, reaching ahead toward the small cares of tomorrow, then that is all right too, and you need not fight it. You do not have to push those thoughts away, or scold them, or hurry them out of the room. You can simply let them be, the way you might let the sound of soft rain on the roof simply be there, but no longer asking anything of you, no longer needing your reply. Let them drift toward the edges of things. Let them settle and grow quiet on their own, the way a room grows quiet when everyone in it has finally found their place. There is nowhere you must be tonight, and nothing you must solve, and so, little by little, your mind can loosen its hold on the day, and let the whole of it float gently away. Tonight we are going to travel, not across any sea, and not to any place that you could find upon a map, but backward, softly, along the long, slow river of time. We are going back to a world that has very nearly vanished from the earth, so completely that most of us alive today have never once known it, and can scarcely even imagine it. We are going back to the world of the old night, the deep, whole, unbroken night of the long ages before electric light, back before the switch upon the wall and the bulb overhead, back before the street lamp and the glowing screen, back to the time when the setting of the sun still meant something vast and final, and darkness came down over the whole of the world exactly as it had come down since the very beginning, and human beings lay down to sleep inside a night far larger, far darker, and far stranger than any night that you have ever known. For sleep itself was a different country then. The way that people came to it, and passed through it, and rose up out of it again, was not at all the way we come to it now, and the night that held them was not the tame and half-lit thing our nights have quietly become, but something older and deeper, a great presence that owned fully half of every day and shaped the whole of how they lived. We are going to move through that lost world slowly tonight, the way you might move through a dim and quiet house by the light of a single candle, from the falling of the dark and the banking of the fire to the small and precious flames that people burned against the black. From the shared and heaped-up warmth of the old cold beds to the curious and well-remembered pattern of a sleep that broke. Once, in the middle of every night, into a gentle waking hour all its own, through the sounds that kept the dark, and the dreams that filled it, and the slow, slow coming of the lights that would one day rub the whole of it away. Some of it is known, set down for us by the very people who lived it, in their diaries and their letters and their prayers and their old remembered sayings, and some of it we can only picture, softly and honestly, and where we are only imagining, I will tell you so gently as we go. But none of it is for you to hold on to. It is only a soft path for your mind to follow down into the dark, and you may let go of it whenever you please. Let us begin then, not with sleep at all, but with the thing that made the old sleep what it was, and shaped its every hour, the coming, each evening over all the world, of the true and ancient dark. Imagine, first, the going down of the sun in a world that had no other light to offer. Picture some ordinary evening, in some ordinary place, a low cottage at the edge of a village, let us say, in a time long before our own, and picture the light beginning to fail. All the day long the sun has been the great governor of everything, the one lamp by which all work was done and all the world was seen, and now slowly it slides down the western sky and touches the far hills and sinks behind them, and its long gold light draws back off the fields and up the walls and out of the low rooms of the house, and is gone. And when it goes, in that old world there is nothing waiting to take its place. No soft glow springs up along the streets. No windows kindle themselves against the dusk. There is only the light the sky itself still holds for a while, draining slowly from gold to rose to grey to a deep and deepening blue. And then, at last, the dark. And it is hard for us, truly, to feel just how dark that dark could be, for we have very nearly lost the memory of it. We live now inside a great and gentle glow that never wholly goes out, the street lamp burning all night beyond the curtain, the little lights that wink and breathe on every device, the pale wash of a distant town thrown up against the underside of the clouds, the switch that stands always within reach of the hand, ready to banish the night in a single instant. Even in the small hours, even with every lamp put out, our darkness is rarely more than a dimness, and the true black, the old black, has quietly slipped away from us. But the people of that older world knew it as closely as they knew their own two hands. When the sun was down and the fire was low and the last small flame was pinched out, the dark that closed over them was total. A dark so complete that a hand held up before the face could not be seen, that the room and everything in it simply ceased to be, that the whole visible world shrank away to nothing at all. It was not a figure of speech to them, and it was not a mood. It was the plain and nightly fact of their lives. Feel what that would mean, softly, as you lie there in your own gentle dimness. When a true darkness comes down like that, the world does not merely grow dim, it disappears. The far hills, the near trees, the road, the fields, the very walls of the room, all of it dissolves and is gone, and there is nothing left to the eye at all but a blackness without edge or end, and into that blackness the whole reach of a person draws in, all at once, to the length of an outstretched arm. You could no longer see across a room, let alone across a field. You could not find the door without feeling your way to it, nor the cup upon the table, nor the face of the one lying close beside you. The great wide daylit world, so full of distance and of detail, folded itself up each night into a small blind space that you could touch but never see, and inside that little space, by feel and by memory alone, people lived out fully half of all their hours upon the earth. And so the night was not simply the tail end of the day, the way it can seem to us, who carry the day on so easily into the small hours with the flick of a switch. The night was a separate country. It had its own borders, crossed at dusk and again at dawn, and it had its own laws and its own long dominion, and every single evening the whole of humankind passed over into it, and did not come back until the light returned. When the dark came, the work of the day had to stop, for you cannot reap or build or sow or read by a darkness you cannot see through. The tools were laid down, the beasts were shut in, the doors were barred, and the human world drew inward and grew small and still. The night belonged to other things now, to sleep and to the dark, and to whatever moved unseen beyond the walls. And people yielded it up to those things, and drew close together, and waited, as their kind had always waited, for the coming again of the morning. There was a kind of fear in it, and we ought not to pretend otherwise, though it was an old and familiar fear, worn smooth by long acquaintance, and mostly held at a gentle distance. Out in that blackness a person could lose the road and wander into the ditch or the mill pond, could stumble and fall and break a bone with no one near to hear, could meet, or fear to meet, the robber and the wild beast, and all the shapeless dreads the mind pours so readily into a dark it cannot see into. And so, when night fell, honest folk came in off the roads and stayed in. To be abroad in the deep dark without good and honest reason was itself a thing that marked a person out as strange, or desperate, or bent on no good, and the night beyond the door became, in the common mind, the proper province of the wanderer and the outcast and the roaming spirit, a country the ordinary soul was wise to leave well alone until the sun came back to make it safe again. The dark was not an empty thing, and it was not neutral. It was a presence, and it was given its due, and it was left, for the most part, to itself. And the length of that dark was not the same the whole year round, but swelled and shrank with the slow turning of the seasons, in a way that ruled the lives of the old people far more firmly than it will ever rule ours. For we, who can make our own daylight at any hour we please with the touch of a switch, scarcely notice now whether the sun goes down at 9 in the long evening or at 4 in the afternoon. But to the people of that older world the difference was an enormous one, and it shaped the whole shape of their days and of their sleep. In the high summer the nights were short and soft and brief, the sun going down late and rising again early, the dark no more than a short warm interval laid between two long bright days, so that a person might sleep but a little and still rise easily with the light. But in the deep of the winter the dark came early and stayed long, terribly long, the sun sinking away in the middle of the afternoon and not climbing back until well on into the morning, so that in the northern lands the darkness might hold the whole world in its hand for 14, or 15, or 16 hours together, far more of the day given over to the night than ever to the day. And through those immense black winter nights, with the cold pressing hard against the walls, and the work of the fields all done and folded away, and little enough that could be done at all by the dear and costly light, people slept or lay warm abade for hours and hours and hours together, far longer than we would ever now dream of sleeping, going down early into the dark and rising late and slow from it, and passing, in the long stretch between, through the whole unhurried layered night of first sleep, and quiet watch and second sleep, with time and room and darkness to spare. The winter night was a great deep well of blackness and of rest, and the people sank down into it and slept the hard cold season half away, and the summer night was only a brief bright pause between the days, and the length of a person's sleep swung slowly back and forth across the whole turning year with the swinging of the dark, in a way that our lit and evened out and always the same nights have very nearly made us forget was ever so. And yet, arched high over all that vast darkness, there hung the great old lights that we have half forgotten how even to see. For when there was no glow of our own spilled out across the earth to drown them, the sky above came into its full and staggering glory. On a clear night the stars came out in their uncountable thousands, thick and keen and crowding the whole black dome from edge to edge, strewn across it in that great pale river of soft light we now so seldom glimpse. And the people of the old night knew them, and named them, and steered by them, and told the turning seasons by them, in a way that we have very nearly let slip through our fingers. And the moon was a public event, a thing that shaped the very plans of ordinary life. A full moon riding high in a clear sky could turn the black night to silver and let a person walk abroad, or ride, or travel, or work on late in the yard, as no other night in the month would allow, and so journeys were timed to it, and gatherings and markets, and the doing of all the things that needed light. The moon was the poor world's lantern, free and faithful, waxing and waning through its slow round, and its comings and its goings were watched and counted and welcomed in a way the switch upon our wall has made it very hard for us now to feel. But the moon is not always there, and the clouds so often hide her face, and on the dark nights, the moonless and the overcast nights, the old blackness came down whole and unbroken over everything, and the world lay drowned in it, and there was nothing for it then but to bar the door, and bank the fire and go to bed. And at the very centre of that small dark world, the one warm and living point in all the closing night, there was the fire. Come close into it now, in from the cold blue dusk, and let it warm you the way it warmed them, for the hearth was the heart of the old house in a way that we can scarcely feel today, when warmth pours unseen and unthought of from the walls and the floor, and asks no tending of us at all. It was, in that older world, the single source of very nearly everything a household needed in order to live. It was the warmth that held off the killing cold of a winter's night. It was the flame that cooked the food and heated the water, and dried the sodden boots and the rain-soaked clothes. And it was, more often than not, the brightest and the steadiest light in the whole of the house. The one glow strong enough and constant enough to gather a whole family around it when the day was done. The fire was where the household truly lived through the long dark evenings, where they cooked and ate and mended and spun and told their tales, and it was, in the plainest and most literal way, the very thing around which the home itself was built. Picture the room then in that last hour before sleep. The fire has burned all evening long on the wide stone hearth, and the family has drawn in close around it, for beyond its circle of light and warmth the room falls away quickly into cold and shadow. There is the low red heart of the fire, and the soft shift and settle of the burning wood, or the glowing peat, or the banked black coal. There are the small flames licking up yellow and blue, throwing their restless, wavering light across the near walls and the faces gathered round, and leaving all the far corners of the room to the dark. There is the good sweet smell of the wood smoke, and the warmth soaking into the shins and the outstretched hands, and the low, slow talk that runs on quietly in the firelight, and the long shadows swaying and leaning up the walls as the flames rise and fall. This was the hearthside hour, the gentle close of very nearly every day. The whole household gathered into the one bright, warm circle that the fire made against the enormous dark, not one of them able to see much of anything beyond it, and not one of them needing to. And that firelit hour was not an idle one, for all its warmth and all its rest. It was the time when the quiet indoor work of the household was done, the work that needed busy hands but not much light, and that filled the long dark evenings between the supper and the sleep. By the soft flicker of the fire the women spun their thread, the endless patient turning of the spindle or the low steady whir of the wheel, spinning the wool and the flax into yarn, hour upon hour, all through the winter dark, and they knitted, and sewed, and darned, and mended, half by feel and half by sight, their fingers knowing the old work so well by now that they scarcely needed to watch it at all. The men mended their tools and their harness, whittled and carved and shaped, plaited straw and rushes, saw to the 100 small repairs that a house and a farm forever need. The children were set their own little tasks, or played their quiet games away in the shadows, or simply sat close and still and listened. And over all the low work there ran the talk, and the songs, and above all the old tales, for the firelit evening was the great and ancient time of the telling of stories, when the long memory of a people was handed down from the old to the young, mouth to ear, in the dark. The grandmother by the fire told over the tales that she had heard at her own grandmother's knee, the old stories and the old songs and the old sayings, the histories of the family and the doings of the village, the wonders and the warnings and the long winter's tales that were kept alive by nothing in the world but the telling of them, night after night, by the fire, in the dark. This was how a people with little writing remembered itself, and taught itself, and knew itself, old to young, voice to ear, in the firelight in the evening, in the one warm circle held against the enormous dark, and the banked fire and the shared tale and the low-turning wheel were the very fabric and comfort of the old winter night, before ever the sleepers took up their light and climbed away to their beds. But the fire could not simply be left to burn on freely through the night. Wood and peat and coal were precious things, gathered and cut and carried home at no small cost of labour, and not to be squandered blazing away in an empty room while everyone lay asleep, and a fire left burning high and unwatched in a house of old timber and dry thatch was a deadly danger too, for a single stray spark in the small hours could wake a family to a house already full of flame. And so, last of all, before the household climbed away to bed, there came one of the small and faithful rituals of the old night, the banking of the fire. The glowing embers were raked together into a close and living heap at the back of the hearth, drawn in and gathered upon themselves. And then over them was laid a soft grey blanket of ashes, scooped up and mounded gently across the coals, covering them, smothering the flame down and down to the barest, slowest sleeping smoulder. Banked so, buried warm in its own soft ash, the fire would not blaze, and would not spread, and would not burn itself away to cold nothing before the dawn, but would hold, deep down at its hidden heart, a small living seed of heat and light, breathing quietly to itself through all the long hours of the dark. And that was a thing of real importance, the keeping of that seed, for it was no light matter to make fire afresh in the old world. There were no easy little matches to be struck against a box. To kindle a wholly new flame from cold meant slow and patient work with flint and steel and a scrap of dry tinder, striking and striking for a shower of sparks, catching one at last in the tinder, and coaxing the faint red glow of it up into a thread of smoke, and the smoke into a flame, a chancy, fiddling, cold-fingered business at the best of times, and a cheerless one indeed on a raw black winter's morning. Far better, far kinder, far easier, to keep the old fire living gently through the night than to have to raise a new one from nothing at the dawn. And so the banked fire was tended almost like a sleeping creature of the household, covered up warm at night, and woken gently in the morning, when the cool grey ash was raked back off the still glowing coals beneath, and fresh fuel was laid on, and a little breath, or the soft wheeze of the bellows, brought the flame leaping back up into life. In some houses the fire was never, from one year's end clean to the next, allowed to die at all, kept alive there on the hearth for years, for a whole lifetime, banked down every single night and roused again every single dawn. One unbroken flame carried on through all the turning seasons, like a small and faithful heart beating quietly at the very centre of the home. There was even a word for this, and an old law behind it, and a bell to sound it, for in the towns and the villages of that older world, when the night came on, a bell would ring out slow across the rooftops to tell the people that the hour had come to cover up their fires, and put out their lights, and take themselves away to their rest. Curfew, we call it even now, though we have quite forgotten what the plain old word once meant, for it comes down to us, worn soft by the centuries, from an old phrase that meant, simply and exactly, to cover the fire. When the curfew bell went tolling through the dusk, it was the signal to bank the hearth and douse the flame, and let the whole town settle down into darkness for the night. A guard against the ever-present terror of fire in the close-packed wooden streets, and a marking, too, of the very boundary of the day, the appointed moment when the lawful, waking, working world lay itself down and gave the night over wholly to sleep. And so the same small act was done, on the same evening signal, in house after house after house across the town. The raking in of the coals, the mounding of the soft ash, the smothering of the flame down to its sleeping glow, until the whole place had banked its fires together, and put out its lights together, and lay down together in the one great shared dark. And there was a deep and simple comfort in that banked and glowing hearth, all through the night, even to those long asleep and quite unaware of it. It was warmth held safe in reserve against the deeper cold to come. It was the near certainty of an easy fire in the morning, ready to be woken. And it was, in that small blind world, one single point that still faintly lived and glowed while everything else lay drowned in black. The low red eye of the coals beneath their soft grey ash, breathing softly to themselves in the empty room, keeping the long night's watch over the sleeping house. If someone rose in the dark hours, as we shall see that people very often did, it was to that faint red glow that they turned, stirring the coals with the poker, coaxing up a little tongue of flame for light and for warmth in the very deep of the night. And to that same soft glow the whole household would come down again in the grey of the morning, to wake it and feed it, and gather themselves once more around it. The banked fire was the one thread of warmth and light drawn unbroken straight through the heart of the dark, and with it tended and safe, and the door barred fast, and the great dark come down whole over all the world, the old household was ready, at last, to sleep. Now suppose the household did not wish to go straight up to their beds when the fire was banked. Suppose there was still something that needed doing in the dark, a child to be tended, a chapter of the good book to be read aloud, a bit of sewing or spinning or reckoning to be finished, a long winter evening yet to be filled somehow between the supper and the sleep. Then they would need light, real light they could carry and set down and work close beside. And here we come upon one of the deepest and most easily forgotten truths of the whole of that old world. Light, in the age before electricity, was not free, and it was not endless, and it was never, ever to be wasted. It was a thing you made or bought at real and reckoned cost, and burned up only a little at a time, and counted and hoarded, and did without far more often than we would ever dream of doing. To make an artificial light was to spend something precious. And so the people of the old night lived their evenings in a careful, frugal, rationed little glow that we, who flood our nights with brightness at the mere touch of one finger, and never once give it a thought, can hardly bring ourselves to imagine. For the poorest households, the humblest and the cheapest light of all was the rushlight, and there is a great tender simplicity in the way that it was made. Out in the damp meadows and along the wet ditches grew the common soft rush, and in the summer the children and the women would go and gather it by the armful and bring it home. Each green rush was stripped of its skin with care, all but a single narrow ribbon of the peel left running up one side to hold the soft white pith together. And then the peeled pith was drawn again and again through hot melted fat, the scrapings and the leavings of the kitchen, the grease from the bacon and the mutton, whatever poor fat the household could spare, until it was soaked and coated through and through. Dried and stiffened, these long slender rushes became the poor family's candles, burned in a simple iron holder that gripped the rush at a slant in its little pincer jaws. A rush of a good length, better than a couple of feet long, might burn for something near to half an hour or an hour, no more, giving out a small, low, wavering, buttery yellow flame, light enough to see your own hands by, light enough to find your way to the bed or to keep a little quiet work going, and truly no more than that. It cost almost nothing but the gathering and the kitchen's spare grease, and so even the very poor could have a little light of an evening, but it was a slight and modest and quickly burned little light, giving just so much, and then no more. A step up from the rushlight was the tallow candle, and this was the ordinary, everyday, working light of the great mass of common households. It too was made of animal fat, of tallow, the rendered hard fat of the ox and the sheep, melted down and either poured into moulds about a wick, or built up in patient layer upon layer by dipping the wick again and again into the hot fat until it thickened slowly into a candle. And a tallow candle gave a good honest light, steadier and stronger than a rush, but it had its trials, and anyone who has read the old accounts knows them well. It smoked. It smelled. A thick, greasy, mutton-fat smell that hung heavy about a closed room. It guttered and dripped and ran down its own sides in the draught. And worst of all, it needed forever tending, for the wicks of those old candles did not burn cleanly away to nothing as ours do, but grew a long black charred snuff at the tip that had to be pinched or snipped off, again and again, every little while, with a small pair of scissored tongs called the snuffers, or else the flame would sink, and dim and smoke, and all but drown itself in its own guttering. To sit up of an evening by a tallow candle was to be forever reaching over to snuff it and trim it back to brightness, tending the little flame much the way one tended the fire. It was light, and it was welcome light, but it was work, and it was cost, and it was watched over closely. Finer by far than either of these, and quite beyond the reach of the ordinary purse, was the candle of beeswax, clean and pale and sweet-smelling, burning bright and tall and almost smokeless, needing little tending, a true and a lovely light. But beeswax was dear, very dear, and so the wax candle was the light of the church and the great house and the wealthy table, kept for the altar and the feast and the fine occasion, while the poor and the middling sort made do below with their tallow and their rushes. And older still than any candle, reaching back into the very deepest ages of our kind, there was the simple lamp, a little vessel of clay or of metal holding a small pool of oil or of melted fat, with a twist of fibre laid in it for a wick and lit at the lip, burning slow and low and smoky. In one form or another that small flame in a dish had lit the human night for very many thousands of years, and it lit it still, in cottage and in cabin, wherever a little oil or fat could be spared to feed it. But all of these lights, the grand and the humble alike, had this one thing in common. They were small. Even the finest, tallest wax candle threw only a little globe of glow about itself, a soft pool of gold a few feet wide, and beyond the trembling edge of that pool the old dark still pressed in close on every side, unbroken and patient, exactly as it always had. And it is worth resting a moment on what that old light was actually like to live inside, for it was a wholly different light from the flat white brilliance that we now flood our rooms with at a touch, and it made a wholly different world. Firelight and candlelight are warm lights, golden and reddish and soft, and they do not hold still, they breathe, and waver, and flicker, and lean, so that in a room lit only by flame nothing is ever perfectly still. The shadows sway and stir upon the walls, the light shifts gently and endlessly over every face, and the whole room seems faintly alive, faintly moving, wrapped all about in a soft and living glow. And such a light does not reach far. It makes a small warm golden globe about itself, and leaves everything beyond that globe to a deep and gentle shadow, so that a room was never all lit at once, evenly and everywhere, as ours so coldly are, but had its bright warm living heart there by the flame, and its dim and shadowed edges fading softly off into the dark. It was a dimmer world, far dimmer than ours, and a smaller one, drawn close and intimate about its few small flames. But it was a warmer world to the eye, and a gentler one, and the people who lived in it grew far more used to the dark than we with our switches will ever have the chance to grow, and saw more by a little light than we would ever think possible, and found the glow of a single candle, or the red of the banked fire, light enough to move and live and be at peace by. We have gained a great and a useful brightness, but we have quietly lost that soft gold breathing light, and the deep kind shadow that it lived within, very nearly altogether. And because light cost so dearly, it was spent with a care that we have wholly and completely lost. A single candle or a single rushlight might serve a whole family for a whole long evening, all of them gathered in close about the one small flame to share its little light, the mother sewing in the brightest heart of it, the children at their tasks or their quiet games in the dimmer edge, the grandfather nodding just beyond, every one of them drawn in together to the one glow, exactly the way they had drawn in together to the fire. To burn 2 candles at once, where one would do, was a small extravagance to be noticed and remarked. To leave a good candle burning in an empty room was very nearly a small sin. We still keep the old saying, though we have quite forgotten the cold arithmetic that first lay behind it, that a thing not worth the doing is a thing not worth the candle, not worth the precious light that would be burned away in the doing of it. And when the evening's work was finished, the plainest economy of all, and the oldest, was simply this: to put out the light and go to bed. For why burn costly tallow on and on into the depths of the night, when the darkness was free, and sleep was free, and the bed lay waiting warm? And so people went to their beds early by our reckoning, down with the last of the daylight, or not so very long after, not because they were dull, or simple, or had nothing better to do, but because the night was long and dark and cold, and light was dear, and the wisest and the warmest and the very cheapest thing to do with the darkness was to lie down and sleep in it, which brings us, softly, at last, to the bed itself. The bed that waited for them across the cold room or at the top of the dark and narrow stair was very often the single most valued piece of furniture in the whole of the house, and no wonder, for into it a person poured a full third and more of the whole of their life, and out of it, in that hard world, came so much of what little comfort there was to be had. In a poor cottage the bed might be no more than a great sack of straw or of dry chaff laid down on the floor or on a low wooden frame, with such rough coverings heaped over it as could be got. But in a house of any substance at all the bed was a great and serious construction, a thing of real pride, often the finest object the family owned, and the one most carefully written into the will and handed down. A stout wooden frame strung across, with a tight lattice of drawn ropes to hold the bedding up off the cold floor. Upon the ropes a mattress, or two, of course straw at the bottom and. If the household could rise to such a thing, a deep and yielding feather bed laid soft above, a long bolster and plump pillows for the head, and over the whole of it a heaped and glorious weight of woolen blankets and coverlets and quilts. And around the grandest of these beds there hung curtains, heavy hangings drawn all the way round the frame upon their rails, closing the sleeper into a small warm private room of cloth set within the great cold room, shutting out the draughts and the damp night air, and holding the gathered warmth of the body close about it all through the dark. For the chamber where people slept was very often bitterly and achingly cold, and this too is a thing we must feel, softly, if we are to understand the old sleep at all. The one fire of the house burned down below, on the hearth in the main room, and its warmth climbed the stairs but rarely, and but feebly. The upper rooms and the back rooms where the beds stood had no fire of their own at all, no warmth in them, but what the sleepers carried up and made there for themselves. On a hard winter's night the cold in such a room was a real and a biting thing, a presence in the air. The breath smoked white above the pillow. Water left standing in the ewer might wear a skin of ice by morning. Frost crept in ferns and feathers and flowers across the inside of the small window panes, and the very sheets, when first you slid down between them, were cold and clammy and faintly damp with the raw chill of the room, cold enough to snatch the breath clean out of you. To climb into such a bed was to climb down into cold, and to lie there for a while quite still, half shivering, gathering your own small warmth about you, waiting for the heaped wool and the slow heat of your own body to make, little by little, a warm hollow in the cold, a warm nest hard won, that you soon learned to guard and to treasure, and never lightly or carelessly to leave. And so there were small kindnesses devised against that cold, and the dearest and most welcome of them was the warming pan. Picture it, a wide, shallow, round pan of bright brass or copper, with a hinged and prettily pierced lid, fixed to the end of a long wooden handle, so that the whole thing looked something like a great round covered frying pan meant for the fire. Into it were shovelled hot embers and glowing coals straight from the hearth below, and then, just before bedtime, someone would carry it carefully up to the cold chamber and pass it slowly to and fro between the icy sheets, up and down the length of the bed, the good heat of the coals soaking out through the metal and driving the deathly chill from the linen, so that the bed, when at last its owner came to climb in, was not a thing of shivering cold, but a waiting pocket of gentle, spreading warmth. It was one of the small great comforts of the old world, that pan of borrowed fire carried up the stairs to warm the bed, a little of the hearth's own heat brought up out of the dark, and tucked in between the sheets against the coming of the sleeper. And in humbler households the very same thing was done with whatever came to hand, a smooth stone or a brick heated at the fire, and wrapped round in an old cloth, a warmed sandbag, a heated flat iron, laid down at the foot of the bed to keep the feet from the cold through all the long hours of the night. Against the great cold of the sleeping room, every least scrap of borrowed warmth was precious and gratefully received. And think too of the bed itself, and of the slow sinking down into it, for the very textures of the old bed were a whole small world of their own. In the poorer houses the mattress was stuffed with straw, or with dry chaff, or with leaves or bracken gathered and dried, rustling and crackling softly beneath the weight of the body, and needing to be shaken up and freshened and renewed. And there was a rough and honest comfort in it, the sweet dry smell of the straw, the give and the whisper of it beneath you as you settled. But in a house that had risen a little in the world there was the feather bed, that great soft deep sack of down and feathers, plumped and shaken and beaten up anew each morning into a yielding softness, into which the weary body sank down, and was gathered up warm on every side and held. Over the sleeper lay the blankets of good thick wool, and often a coverlet or a quilt heaped above them, a real and considerable weight of bedding piled on high against the cold, pressing gently down, soft and heavy and secure. That same old deep animal comfort of a weight upon the sleeping body that so many of us still reach for even now, and upon the head, against the sharp chill of the unwarmed room, there went the nightcap, a soft close cap of linen or of knitted wool, drawn down snug over the hair and the ears, for the head must lie bare above the covers, and the air of the room was cold, so that the sleeper, capped and covered, and burrowed down deep into the feathers, with the wool heaped heavy over all, lay at the last in a warm and total nest, with only the face left out in the cold air of the chamber, breathing the chill, while all the rest of the body lay gathered warm and deep and safe. Feel that, softly, now, the burrowing down, the heaping up of the warmth, the one cool cheek and the whole warm sheltered body, as you settle yourself deeper into your own. But the oldest and the surest warmth of all, in those old cold beds, was the warmth of another living body lying close beside you, and here we come to something that was utterly ordinary then, and yet would seem strange indeed to many of us now. For in that world beds were shared, freely and as a plain matter of course, in a way that we have very nearly forgotten. It was not merely that the husband and the wife lay close, as married folk do still. It was that whole families slept together, the parents and the children heaped into the same bed, or the same few beds, in the same single room, the little ones tucked in warm among the elder, sometimes laid head to toe along the bed to fit them all in. The servants shared their beds with the other servants, the children shared with the children, and even travellers, strangers meeting for the very first time at a crowded inn along the road, would think nothing at all of being put to sleep 2 or 3 together in the same bed for the night, for beds were few and dear, and the night was cold, and to share one was only sensible and only kind. There was no shame in it, and there was little thought given to it. It was simply how sleep was done. And there was a deep and simple animal comfort in it too, that we, in our separate and solitary beds, have quietly traded away in exchange for our privacy, the plain warmth of others close about you in the dark, the small soft sounds of their breathing rising and falling, the shared heat gathered under the shared blankets, the old creaturely safety of the huddle against the cold and the enormous night. To sleep quite alone in a cold bed was, to a great many in that world, a poor and a chilly and a lonesome thing. To sleep warm in the gentle press of your own people was the ordinary, nightly, unremarkable comfort of the dark. And where there were not beds enough to go around, or where the ranks and the order of a great household were to be kept, There was the truckle bed, the trundle bed as some called it, a low, small bed set upon little wooden wheels, made to be rolled quite out of sight away beneath the tall high bed of the master or the mistress all through the day, and drawn out again across the floor at night. The child, or the servant, or the young apprentice would sleep there, down low and near the floor, tucked in beneath and beside the greater bed, rolled out into the dark each evening, and rolled away again each morning, so that a single small chamber might hold, hidden and revealed by turns, sleeping places for far more souls than its narrow floor could ever seem to allow. There is something homely and tender in the very picture of it. The little low bed sliding out from under the big one as the candle is carried into the room. The whole household quietly stacking itself away for the night, each near to the other in the dark, the small bed and the great bed, and all the sleepers together in the one warm room. This was how a great part of the whole world lay down to sleep, close and warm, and together, heaped up under the wool against the cold, the curtains drawn round, the warming pan's borrowed heat fading slowly away in the sheets, the last small rushlight pinched out between finger and thumb, and the dark come down whole and complete over the entire shared, breathing, sleeping room. Now let the household be abed at last, all of them, warm and burrowed down in their heaped and curtained beds. But come back with me for one moment to the getting there, to those last few small acts before sleep. For they too had their slow and settling rhythm, and there is peace in them. When the fire was banked, and the evening done, the family took up their single light and went away to their beds, and the going to bed, in the old house, was itself a small journey out of the warm-lit circle and into the cold and the dark. Up the steep dark stair they climbed, or across the cold flags of an unlit room, one candle or one rushlight carried before them, its little pool of gold sliding and swaying along the walls, the great dark falling in again close behind them as they went. The children were seen to their places, the coverings drawn up snug beneath their chins. The last of the light was used to find the bed, to climb the step or the little set of bedstairs up into its high frame, to plump the bolster and draw the heavy curtains round. And then, at the very last of all, the light itself was put out, pinched or snuffed or softly blown, and with its going the dark rushed in whole and complete, filling the room from wall to wall in an instant, and the household lay down in it, warm beneath the wool, and waited for sleep to come. There is a great and simple peace in that last putting out of the light, that deliberate nightly surrender of the one little flame to the vast and patient dark, a thing done, without a second thought, every single night of every single life. And very often the last thing of all, once the covers were drawn up and the body had begun to warm the bed, was a prayer. In a great many households, high and low alike, the day was closed and the sleep was entered upon with quiet words said into the dark, a prayer of thanks for the day now safely ended, a prayer of trust for the long night still to come, a commending of oneself and one's household and one's dear ones into safe and gentle keeping until the morning should return. For the old night, remember, was a fearful as well as a familiar country, and sleep itself was felt to be a little like a small and nightly death, a laying down of the whole waking self into the dark and the unknown, out of which one trusted, but could never be entirely certain, to rise up again whole with the light. And so people went down into it with a word of trust upon their lips, giving themselves over to the dark and to whatever kept and watched them, loosening their hold upon the day and upon their own waking selves, and letting go. And the children, above all, were gentled down into the dark with a special care, for a child fears the dark as the oldest and the most natural of all our fears, and the dark of that old world was a real and a total darkness indeed. So the little ones were tucked down warm in their truckle beds and their shared beds, in among the warm sleeping bodies of their brothers and their sisters, and they were sung to, the low old lullabies that mothers have crooned over cradles since the very beginning of the world, the soft and wordless comfort of a known and loving voice going on gently in the dark. They were told, perhaps, one last quiet tale, or they simply heard the murmur of the grown folks' voices carrying on, low and easy and unhurried, by the last red light of the fire, that most comforting of all sounds to a child drifting away toward sleep, the sound of the elders still awake and near, and keeping the whole world in its proper order, while the little one is free to let go. And then they slid down into the deep and headlong sleep of childhood, that sleep so very much deeper than any we shall ever know again in later years, the sleep from which a child may be lifted and carried and laid down, and never once stir, down into the first sleep, warm among their own kin, held close on every side, while the fire sank low and the dark drew deep, and the grown folks' voices murmured softly on. There are few things in all the old night more tender than that, the child asleep in the heaped warm bed, in the whole and total dark, and yet entirely unafraid, because the known voices go on quietly nearby, and the warm bodies press close all around, and the night, for all its vast blackness, is full and warm with its own people. And then, sleep, and how welcome it was, and how deep, for these were bodies that had truly earned it. The people of that world worked, most of them, with the whole of their bodies, all the day long and out of doors, and against the weather they walked where we ride, and lifted and carried and dug, and reaped and hauled and scrubbed where we press a button or sit still in a chair, and by the time the dark came down and the bed at last received them, they were tired all the way through, tired down to the marrow, with the good, clean, heavy, honest tiredness of a body well and fully used. And into a tiredness like that, sleep comes swiftly, and it sinks deep. There was little among them of our restless lying awake with a racing, glowing mind, our sleep held off for hours by the day's bright screens, and jangled nerves and unspent sitting energy. There was the long day's labour, and the warm bed at the end of it, and the swift and grateful falling down into a sleep as deep and as dark as a well. Feel that, gently as your own body grows heavier now, the sinking, the loosening, the letting go, the warm dark closing softly over you, the whole weight of the day at last laid all the way down. This was the first sleep, and that they called it the first sleep, and not merely sleep, is the quiet key to one of the loveliest and strangest things we know about the way the old world rested. For their night, quite unlike our own, did not run all in one single unbroken piece from the dark clean through to the dawn. For a while, though, let them simply sleep, and let the whole house be still. Picture it now from a little above, in the deep of the early night, the low cottage dark and silent under the enormous vault of the sky, the fire banked to its soft red glow on the hearth below, the beds full of sleepers breathing slow and deep and even, the whole household gone down together into that first deep sleep of the night, while the great dark stands its guard outside the barred door. Everyone is down. The village is down. Across the whole dark sweep of the country, in every cottage and farmhouse and cramped and crowded town lodging, the people lie sunk in their first sleep, that first long deep draught of rest drawn down in the early hours of the night. The world has gone as quiet and as dark and as still as it ever goes. And for 2 or 3 or 4 hours they sleep on so, deep and heavy and all but unmoving, while the night wheels its slow arc overhead, and the stars turn, and the coals sink lower and lower into their soft grey ash. But then, somewhere near the middle of the night, somewhere in the small dark hours long before there is any thought of a dawn, something happens. Something that happened to them nightly and happens to us almost never, and it is among the gentlest and most curious of all the secrets of the old sleep. Quietly, of their own accord, without alarm and without distress, they begin to wake. They begin to wake, and this is the thing to hold gently in your mind, the strange and lovely heart of the whole of tonight's story. So let us come to it slowly and softly. It was not that their sleep was broken in the way that we would mean it, not that they were poor or troubled sleepers, restless or unwell, or somehow cheated of their rest. It was that the natural, the ordinary, the fully expected shape of a night's sleep, all through the long ages before the coming of bright artificial light, was not one single unbroken block from dusk clean through to dawn, as very nearly all of ours now is, but two separate and distinct sleeps, with a quiet, gentle, wakeful hour lying easily in between them. They slept a first sleep, deep and long, through the early hours of the dark. Then, of their own accord, with no clock and no alarm and no trouble to rouse them, somewhere near the middle of the night, they woke and lay awake, calm and unhurried and quite untroubled, for an hour or so in the deep of the dark. And then, after a while, in their own good time, they sank down once more into a second sleep, and slept on peacefully through until the morning. First sleep and second sleep, with the soft waking hour set in between them like a still pool between two deep waters, this was the ordinary architecture of the human night, for century upon century upon century, and scarcely a soul thought it in the least remarkable, because it was simply, and always, how everyone had ever slept. Now, how can we possibly know such a thing? How can we know how ordinary people passed the small quiet hours of their nights so very many hundreds of years ago, when they left so little behind and are so long gone? Here is the quietly wonderful part, and I will tell it to you softly, for it is a gentle story in itself. For a very long time we did not know it at all. The whole pattern had been so completely forgotten, so utterly erased, that no one even thought to go looking for it. But a historian of our own time, patiently reading his slow way through great heaps and drifts of old writings, through the diaries and the letters, the court records and the medical books, the poems and the plays and the prayer manuals and the old country sayings of many different countries and many different centuries, began, little by little, to notice something strange. Again and again, in source after source, scattered right across the centuries, he kept coming upon these same curious phrases, dropped always in passing, and never once explained the first sleep, and the second sleep, and waking between the two sleeps. A man would note in his diary that he had woken after his first sleep. A doctor would counsel doing this or that between the first sleep and the second. An old tale would have its people rise and stir and speak together in the watch, after the first sleep. Hundreds upon hundreds of such small mentions, in language after language, every one of them pointing quietly to the very same forgotten truth, that people once slept their night in two halves, and woke, on purpose and in peace, in the still space that lay between. The historian's name is Roger Eckerk, and his patient gathering up of all those small scattered mentions into one clear and certain picture is among the gentlest and most marvellous pieces of quiet detective work that we have. The recovering, out of the dust of the archives, of a thing the whole world had once done every single night for thousands of years, and had then so entirely forgotten that it no longer knew it had ever done it at all. And it was not the quirk or the private custom of any one people or of any one small corner of the world, this gentle dividing of the night in two. It was very nearly everywhere, wherever the long natural dark still ruled over the hours. The old writings speak of it in one tongue after another, each with its own plain and settled words for the two sleeps, as though every people upon the earth had noticed the very same simple truth and quietly given it a name of their own. The first sleep and the second sleep, the sleep before midnight and the sleep after it, the dead sleep and the morning sleep. It turns up in the old poems and the old plays and the old laws and the old physicians' books. It turns up in the tales told by the fire, where the folk of the story wake and rise and go quietly about their small business in the dark hours between the sleeps, as easily and as naturally as we might rise from a chair. It was, so far as we are now able to tell, simply the common and natural shape of human sleep, kept by very nearly all people, in very nearly all places, for as far back as the writings can carry us, and surely for very much longer still before that, the true old pattern of the night, worn deep into our kind across uncounted thousands of years of living beneath the real and lengthy dark. It is we, with our single hard unbroken block of sleep, who are the strange ones, the new ones, the great exception, and it is only the vast flood of our own artificial light, in these last few short generations, that has quietly made us so. And what did they do in that soft waking hour between the sleeps? That, perhaps, is the tenderest part of all to rest upon. For it was not an anxious or a fretful wakefulness, not the tense and staring lying awake that we so dread. It was a calm and gentle and half-dreaming hour, warm in the bed, in no hurry whatever to be anywhere or to do anything, or even to sleep again. An hour that seemed to belong wholly to the quiet inner life of a person. Some simply lay still, warm and drowsy and deeply at peace, and let their thoughts drift where they would in the dark, turning over gently the day just gone, or the day soon to come, in that soft, slow, unpressured, floating way that thoughts have of moving only in the deep of the night. Many prayed. Indeed, the hour was widely thought a especially good and blessed time for prayer, and for the calm examining of the soul, with all the world gone still and the mind gone quiet, and there were devotional books written with just this waking hour in mind, prayers and meditations meant to be taken up softly in the stillness between the first sleep and the second. Couples talked, low and easy, in the dark, for here, in the very middle of the night, with the long day's labour set safely away on either side of it, was one of the few truly private and unhurried hours that a hard-working husband and wife might ever have wholly to themselves, to murmur together of things small and large. The children and the harvest and the turning year and the whole shared fabric of their lives, in soft voices in the warm dark. Lovers loved. The plain-spoken physicians of the old world noted, without the least embarrassment, that this hour after a first deep sleep had rested and eased and quieted the body was a particularly natural and wholesome time for a married couple to come together. And some rose, quietly and briefly, into the cold, to stir the banked fire and lay on a little fuel, to look in upon a sleeping child or a beast in the byre, to step out under the wheeling stars for a moment, to see to some small need, and then to climb back gratefully into the warm waiting hollow of the bed and let the second sleep come stealing up over them. Picture just one of them, softly, on some winter's night long, long ago, a woman waking in her cottage in the small dark hours out of her first deep sleep, exactly as she does every night of her life, and thinks nothing whatever of it. She does not open her eyes with a start, nor reach about for any light, nor lie there wondering what it was that woke her. She simply surfaces, gently, up into the warm dark, aware of the heaped wool lying soft and heavy over her, and the warm familiar shape of her husband breathing slow and deep beside her, and the children breathing on in the truckle bed down below. The room is black and cold above the covers, and down upon the hearth, if she lifts her head a little, she can just make out the faint red eye of the banked fire glowing softly to itself beneath its grey blanket of ash. For a good while she only lies there warm and still and wholly at peace, and lets her mind drift out wherever it wishes to go, over the day just gone, and the bread that must be baked, and the word that a neighbour let fall, and the dear remembered face of a child long dead and long missed, and the slow great turning of the year. Perhaps she and her husband, both of them waking, exchange a few soft words together, of nothing much at all, in the deep and private quiet of the night. Perhaps she rises for a moment into the cold, to stir the fire, or to settle a restless child, and comes hurrying back to the warm hollow of the bed. And then, in a while, with no hurry and no summons and no thought, the drowsiness comes creeping softly back up over her, and her thoughts begin to slip their threads and lose their way, and she turns, and burrows down, and lets the second sleep take her, and is gone, down into the dark, and safe until the morning. That was the shape of it. That was the old night. That for thousands upon thousands of years was simply how the world lay itself down, and rested, and slept. And feel, above everything else, the deep peace of it, the settled, unhurried, unworried peace. For not one of them, waking so in the small dark hours, felt the thing that we so often feel when we wake in the depth of the night, that sudden small flare of dismay, that cold clutch of worry, the anxious counting up of the few hours left before the morning, the fretful fear that we shall not get back to sleep and shall surely pay for it tomorrow. They felt none of that, none of it, because they wholly expected the waking. It was no fault, and no failure, and no ill omen, but simply the turn of the night, as ordinary and as looked for as the turning of the day. There was no clock ticking loud upon the wall to be squinted at and dreaded. There was no alarm set to a hard and particular hour, no sense at all that sleep was a task at which a person might succeed or fail. There was only the long dark night, with room enough and to spare in it for 2 full sleeps and a peaceful hour between them, and the calm and certain knowledge that the second sleep would come, in its own good time, exactly as it always did, and so they lay in the dark quite untroubled, and let the wakeful hour simply be what it was, a still island in the very middle of the night, an hour of prayer and thought and soft talk and love and quiet rest. And then, as the hour wore gently on, and the warmth and the darkness did their slow and patient work, the eyes grew heavy once again, and the thoughts began to loosen, and to slip, and to lose their thread, and down they sank, softly into the second sleep, and slept on, deep and sweet and whole, until the first grey light of the morning came at last to wake them. And I should like to leave a small and gentle gift with you here, before we move on out into the sounds of that old night, a little comfort to carry down with you toward your own sleep. If you should wake tonight, some hours from now, in the deep and the dark of the small quiet hours, as you may, as any of us may, as is the oldest and most human thing in the world to do, I hope that you will remember this. There is nothing whatever wrong in it, and nothing to fear, and nothing at all to fight against. You will only be doing a very old and a very natural thing, a thing your own forebears did quietly every night of their lives, and thought no more of than the rising of the moon. You need not reach for the light, nor reckon up the hours, nor scold yourself, nor lie there stiff and cross with the worry of it. You can simply let it be the watch, that soft old waking hour set gently between the sleeps, and lie warm and still and easy in the dark. And let your thoughts drift wherever they wish to go, and trust, exactly as your grandmothers' grandmothers trusted, that the second sleep will come stealing back for you again in its own good time, and gather you up and carry you softly down and hold you safe until the morning. It always came for them. It will come in time for you. But even in the deepest heart of that old night, when the watch had come and the sleepers lay awake and quiet in the dark, the world beyond the walls was never wholly and entirely silent, for the night had its own sounds, its own soft and familiar music, and the people of that time knew every note of it as well as they knew the faces of their own kin. We, who sleep now inside the low steady hum of our own machines, behind our thick sealed glass in our padded and insulated houses, have grown very nearly deaf to the true voices of the night. But to lie awake in the old dark was to lie inside a whole gentle soundscape, and to read the slow passing of the hours by it, and to be strangely and quietly companioned by it, all through the long black stretch until the dawn. In the towns, chief among all the voices of the night was the voice of the watchman, the bellman, as he was often called, a man who walked the dark and empty streets through all the deep hours while honest folk lay abed, and who called aloud, as he went upon his slow rounds, the hour and the weather, and a word of warning or of blessing to the sleeping town. Through the shuttered window, muffled and far off, and then nearer, and then passing directly below, would come the slow tread of his feet upon the cobbles, the swing and clang of his handbell, and then his long sing-song cry lifted up into the dark, that it was 12 o'clock, or 2, or 4, that it was a cold and frosty morning, or a wet and a windy one, that all for now was well. Past 3 o'clock he would call up into the night, and a cold frosty morning, past 3 o'clock, good morrow, masters all. He bade the people look well to their fires, and their candles, and their locks. He cried the hour, so that any soul lying awake in the dark might know it without stirring, and above all, simply by his passing and his faithful calling. He told the whole sleeping town the very thing it most wished to know in the depth of the dark, that someone was awake, and walking, and keeping the watch while all the rest of them slept. There is a deep old comfort in that, in the voice of the watchman passing beneath the window in the dead middle of the night. The hour told, the weather told, and the quiet assurance called softly up into the black that the town was watched over and guarded, and that all, for this hour at least, was well. And out over the rooftops, near and far, there were the bells, in a world without a clock in every room, without, for the great mass of people, any clock at all. It was the bells that carried the hours out across the town and the countryside, and told the people the shape and the progress of the day and the night. The great bell of the church told the old hours of prayer, the deep and ancient rhythm of morning and evening and the offices set between. The curfew bell rang out the covering of the fires at nightfall. The bells rang the people to worship, and told them, slow and solemn, to their graves. And in the clear, still air of the night, when all the other sounds of the world had died away to nothing, a bell could carry for miles and miles, rolling soft and far across the dark and sleeping fields from some distant steeple, marking the passage of the black hours for anyone lying wakeful to hear it. To the waking sleeper in the deep of the night, that far, slow, solemn tolling of a bell across the sleeping country was a sound filled with a grave and gentle comfort, the very voice of the hours themselves, moving on quietly through the dark, carrying the whole long night along, patiently, toward the morning. And there were the animals, whose voices had told the hours of the night since long, long before there were ever any bells or watchmen at all. Far off across the fields a dog would bark, and another would rouse and answer it, and then another, the sound passing on from farm to farm across the whole dark breadth of the countryside, and then dying slowly away into the quiet again. An owl called, soft and hollow and unhurried, from the wood or the old barn. A fox cried out its strange sharp cry in the frosty dark. The cattle shifted and breathed and lowed gently to themselves in the byre. A horse stamped and blew in the stable. And chief among all the animal voices of the night was the crowing of the cock, for the cockerel crows in the dark hours well before the dawn. And its crowing was, for uncounted ages of the world, one of the great and trusted markers of the night's slow passing. There was the first cock-crow deep down in the small hours, and the second some while after, and the crowing that came thick and near and jubilant at the first faint paling of the eastern sky. Cock-crow was a division of the night that every soul knew by heart, a living clock crowing out across the sleeping land, and to hear the cocks begin, far off and then nearer and then in the very yard, was to know that the long black middle of the night was over and done, and that the dawn, though still altogether unseen, was somewhere on its quiet way. Feel how the whole dark country was gently stitched together, all night long, by these old voices, the dogs, the owls, the foxes, the cattle, the cocks. A soft and rolling night music passed on from farm to farm and field to field, telling out the hours and companioning the wakeful all through the dark. And beneath and between all these gentle voices of the night, there lay a silence of a kind that we, in our humming and ceaseless and traffic-haunted world, have very nearly never once heard. A vast, deep whole silence, the silence of a world with no engines anywhere in it, no machines, nothing at all that whirred or hummed or droned or roared anywhere upon the whole face of the sleeping earth. When the wind was still, and the rain had ceased, and the animals were quiet, and the last late cart had long since creaked and rumbled away home, the silence that came down over the sleeping country was total and immense and profound, a silence with a real texture and a weight to it, so deep and so complete that the smallest single sound fell into it like a pebble dropped into a still dark pool, one far-off dog, one lone slow bell, the hoot of one owl, the creak of one cooling board, each small sound rising up clear and whole and alone, out of the great stillness, and then swallowed softly back down into it again, and gone. It is a silence almost impossible for us even to find any more, let alone to lie down and live inside, but it was the ordinary, nightly, unremarked element of every single soul who ever slept in that old vanished world, the deep still quiet into which the night sounds fell, and out of which they rose, the vast soft hush that lay over all the dark land from the going down of the last sound at dusk to the first faint stir of the morning. And to lie awake in the watch inside that great silence, with only now and then some small far sound to mark and measure it, was to rest within a stillness so deep, and so whole, and so unbroken, that the stillness itself was a kind of peace, and a kind of healing balm, a quiet the very like of which our restless, ringing, never-silent world can scarcely offer us at all any more. And nearest of all, closest of all to the waking sleeper, there were the small, intimate sounds of the weather and of the house itself. The wind moving in the thatch overhead, or moaning low and long in the wide cold chimney, or pressing with a slow soft sigh against the shutters. The rain, when it came, pattering and then streaming on the roof close above the bed. One of the very sweetest of all the night sounds to a warm and sheltered sleeper, in that age exactly as in ours, the rain falling in the dark outside, making the dry warmth within seem all the deeper and the safer and the more complete. The old timbers of the house ticking and creaking softly to themselves as they cooled in the night. The faint settle and shift of the banked coals on the hearth down below. a bare branch tapping and scratching lightly at the wall. These were the small near sounds that wrapped the bed about in the dark, the close and homely breathing voices of the sheltering house, and to lie awake among them in the watch, warm and dry beneath the heaped wool, while the wind went searching round the roof, and the rain streamed down the black window, and the whole snug house creaked gently on around you, was to feel, deep down in the body, the oldest animal gladness there is, the plain wordless joy of being safe, and warm and within, while the wild wet night runs its long course without. And because they woke so, right in the very middle of their dreaming, the people of the old night lived far closer to their dreams than we do now. We, who sleep in one long unbroken block, and so often surface from it at dawn, remembering nothing at all, the whole night's dreaming already gone like mist off the water. To wake in the watch was very often to wake straight up out of a dream, with the dream still bright and whole and warm and close about you, and to lie there afterward in the quiet dark, in that still and drowsy hour, slowly turning the dream over, marvelling at it, wondering what on earth it might have meant. The broken night gave the dreams a place to be caught, and held, and pondered, right there in the peaceful hollow between the two sleeps, and dreams so caught were not lightly let go, for in that older world a dream was not thought to be the idle froth and passing nonsense that we so often take it for now. A dream was a thing of weight. A dream might well mean something. For to the people of the old night, sleep was a kind of doorway, and dreams were what came through it, and no one was ever quite sure, in that world, how much of what came through was mere idle fancy of the sleeping mind, and how much was true and real and sent from somewhere beyond. A dream might be a message, a warning of some danger lying ahead, an omen of good fortune or of ill, a glimpse briefly granted of a thing far away, or of a thing not yet come to pass. A dream might be a visitation, the beloved dead returning, softly, to speak once more with the living, to comfort them or to counsel them, or to ask some small last thing of them, or a word sent from God, or from the saints, or from some other quarter of that whole unseen world which pressed so very much closer in the dark. The boundary between the sleeping mind and the waking world, so firm and so clear and so settled a thing to us, was to them a soft and porous and uncertain border, especially there in the deep of the night, and the dreams that rose up through it were watched, and remembered, and taken seriously, and read closely for their meaning, much the way a person might read the flight of the birds or the shapes of the evening clouds for some word of what was coming. And so there grew up, across the long slow centuries, a whole rich and much-loved lore of dreams and of their reading, an old and treasured body of knowledge about what this dream or that one might truly signify. To dream of clear water, or of muddy, to dream of one's teeth falling, or of flying, or of fire, to dream of a wedding, or of a grave, of gold, of a stranger, of this beast or that, of the returning dead, each was held to carry its own particular meaning, its own quiet hint of the fortune that it foretold, and these meanings were handed down by word of mouth from the old to the young, and gathered up, in time, into little books. The dream books, they were called, cheap and popular and well-thumbed little volumes that a great many households kept somewhere about the place, which listed out the images of dreams and set down beside each one what it was held to portend, and people would turn to them in the morning or ponder over them in the watch to puzzle out the meaning of the strange things that had come drifting to them in the night. We may perhaps smile a little at it now, and gently, but there is something deeply human and deeply tender in it too. This old and careful attending to the dreaming mind, this quiet refusal to let the visions of the night simply fall away unregarded and unremembered. this abiding sense that the sleeping self might somehow know, or see, or be shown, things that the busy waking self never could. And of all the dreams of that old world, the ones held perhaps the most precious of all, and pondered the most tenderly in the watch, were the dreams in which the dead came back. For in a world where death came early and came often, and took the child, and the young wife in her childbed, and the strong man in his very prime, there were few households anywhere left untouched by grief, and few hearts that did not carry some lost and beloved face down into the dark. And when that face returned, as faces do, in a dream, when the lost mother or the dead child or the departed friend came walking quietly back into the sleeping mind, whole again and well again and near enough to reach out and touch, to speak a word with, to simply be beside once more for the length of a dream, it was felt by very many to be no mere trick of the grieving heart at all, but a true and a gracious visit made across the border, a real and gentle drawing near of the beloved dead in the thin dark hours of the night. And to wake up out of such a dream, there in the watch, and lie with it in the dark, was a thing of deep sorrow and deep sweetness strangely mingled. The old ache of the parting felt keenly all over again, and yet, with it, the strange and piercing comfort of having been, just for a moment, in the dreaming dark, together once again. The old night, for all its fears, could be gentle in that way. It could open its quiet door, now and then, and let the lost ones come home for an hour. We know a little more now, or at least we believe that we do, about where our dreams come from and what they truly are. We have our own explanations for them, and they are not the old ones. But we have lost something too, perhaps in the gaining of them, some of the old wonder, some of the old nearness to that strange country we all still cross over into every single night, and yet remember so very little of. The people of the old night did not truly understand their dreams any better than we understand ours, but they lived nearer to them, and honoured them more and let them matter in a way that we have mostly and quietly set aside. And on that we may gently leave them for a while, the sleepers of that vanished world, waking softly in the watch with their dreams still upon them, turning the visions of the night over in the warm dark, reading them for some word of fortune or of warning, welcoming the dear dead home for an hour before, in their own good time, they let the dreams drift away again like smoke, and turned over in the warm heaped bed, and sank back down at last into the second sleep. And let us now leave the deep country dark as well, and go, softly, to see how the night was kept, and lit, and lived through, in the towns, where the dark was not quite so whole and so unbroken, and the little lamps of men held out against it, here and there in the great black. So come up now, out of the single sleeping house, and let us look for a while at the wider shape of the whole night, at how very differently the dark lay upon the lonely open countryside, and upon the gathered and huddled town. For these were two quite different kingdoms of the night, and to pass between them was to pass between two different depths of the dark. And let us begin with the country, and with the deep whole unbroken blackness that lay over it, for that was the older and the truer dark, the ancient dark that had covered the sleeping world since the very beginning of things. Out in the open country, far away from all the works and the lights of men, the night came down utter and complete. There were no lamps at all out there, no street lights, of course, for there were no streets, but no lights of any kind whatever, save the far scattered, shuttered, feeble windows of a lonely farm or two, and those soon lost to sight behind a rise of ground. When the sun was gone and the moon was down, or hidden away behind the cloud, the dark over the fields and the woods and the winding sunken lanes was as deep and as total as any dark can ever be, a blackness that a traveller could very nearly feel, pressing soft against his face, a blackness in which the pale road itself became quite invisible, and the way ahead had to be found by the feel of the rutted track underfoot, by the loom of a darker mass against the merely dark sky, by long deep knowledge of the country, or else was not to be found at all. To be caught out abroad in that country dark, far from any friendly door, was a thing that sensible folk went to real trouble to avoid, and the traveller benighted on some lonely road, feeling his slow blind way forward step by careful step through the whole black world, straining his ears for the bark of a dog, or his eyes for the far small prick of a candle that would mean a house and a welcome, knew a loneliness and a smallness beneath the enormous dark that we, in our glowing world, can now scarcely even imagine. And yet that same deep country dark held within it a beauty that the lit world has since taken almost wholly away from us. For it was out there, under the open country night, with no least glow of man anywhere to spoil or to dim it, that the full and staggering glory of the heavens stood revealed, the whole vast dome of the sky thick and ablaze with more stars than the modern eye has ever once beheld in all its life, the faint far rivers of their light stretched clean across it from edge to edge, the whole silent wheeling splendour of it turning slowly overhead all through the night from dusk to dawn. And it was out there too that the moon came into her full power and her full sweet friendship, for out in the pathless dark of the country a bright moon was not merely lovely but truly precious, a real and faithful lantern hung up in the very sky, by whose cool silver light a traveller could find and hold the road, and journey on, and see the whole sleeping land laid out silvered and shadowed and still about him. The country people knew the moon's slow comings and goings as well as we know the days of the week, and blessed her light, and timed their darker errands and their journeys by her, and to walk a country road by the light of a full high moon, the whole land washed in silver and deep blue shadow and utterly, breathlessly still, was one of the quiet great beauties of the old night that the lamp and the bulb have very nearly taken from the world forever. But come now off the dark and lonely road, and in through the gates of a town, and the night takes on quite another character altogether, still dark, far darker than any town that you have ever known, but no longer wholly and perfectly black, for here and there about it the little lamps of men held back the dark in small and scattered pools. In many a town the householders were bidden, by old and settled custom and ordinance, to hang out a lantern or a lit candle beside the door on the darker nights, to give a little light down into the street below, and so, going along such a street, there might be, here and there and far between, a faint hanging glow, and beneath it a small trembling pool of gold upon the cobbles. And then dark again. And then, on a good way further, another. The watchman went his slow rounds with his own lantern swinging in his hand, a little moving star of light drifting on through the black streets. From behind the shuttered windows of the houses, thin blades and chinks of candlelight leaked and spilled out into the dark. The door of a tavern or an inn, thrown suddenly open, would fling a warm wedge of firelight and noise and laughter out across the street, and then swing to and shut it off again. And for those who could afford the small comfort of it, there were the link boys and men who waited at the street corners with blazing torches of pitch-soaked rope, called links, and who would light a gentleman or a lady safely home through the dark streets for a small coin, their torches streaming and smoking overhead, a little travelling island of ruddy light moving slowly through the town. So the town at night was not one single dark, but a scattering of small lights within a large dark, a hung lantern, a leaking shutter, the watchman's swinging lamp, The link boy's smoking torch, the sudden warm spill from an opening door, little pools of gold strung here and there along streets that were, between them and beyond them, every bit as black as the country lanes. And the town's night had an order to it, and a gathered life, that the empty country dark did not. The gates were shut and barred fast at nightfall, closing the town in warm upon itself. The curfew rang out over the roofs, the watch was set to walk the streets and call the hours, and keep what peace could be kept in the dark. And within that guarded dark there was, in its small lit pockets, a kind of huddled night-life. The tavern warm and loud behind its shutters, the late travellers gathered at the inn, the neighbours sitting up together over a shared fire and a shared pot, the town keeping a little company against the night in a way the lonely outlying farm never could. And yet even the busiest, liveliest town, by our own blazing standards, lay sunk in a deep and general darkness the moment the door was shut and the candle carried up the stair. The little lamps were few, and small, and local, and between them and beyond them the old dark held its ancient ground exactly as it always had. Step but 3 paces from the lantern's pool, and it closed round you once again, whole and soft and black. The town had not conquered the night, not remotely. It had only lit a few small brave candles down in it, and drawn its stout walls about itself, and set its watch and gone to bed, and left the great dark, as every soul on earth still did, to keep and to hold the whole world until the morning. And to the weary traveller crossing the black country in the last hour of a long day's journey, cold and footsore and half lost in the dark, the first far sight of a town's few lights, that little low huddle of faint gold pricks gathered down on the black rim of the world, growing slowly, slowly nearer with each step, was one of the very sweetest sights that the old night had it in its power to give, warmth there ahead, and shelter, and company, and food, and an end at last to the lonely blind dark of the road. Those few small distant lights meant home, and safety, and rest. For many thousands of years that was as much light as the whole human night had ever held. A few flames, a few lamps, a few small scattered pools of gold, strung thin and far across a world that was, everywhere else and always, simply and wholly dark. But that, at long last, was about to change, slowly at first, and then with a swift and gathering speed, in a way that would remake the human night more completely than anything had done since the first taming of fire itself. The little lamps were about to become a flood, and to that last great change, the slow and total drowning of the old dark beneath a rising tide of light, let us turn now, gently, as our own long night draws on toward its close. For many thousands upon thousands of years, as we have seen all through tonight, the human night had scarcely changed at all. The fire on the hearth, the rushlight and the tallow candle, the little smoky oil lamp, the deep whole dark lying all around and beyond, this had been the settled shape of the night for age after age after age, so unchanging and so seemingly eternal that no one alive ever thought to imagine it could be any other way. And then, within the space of only a few short generations, a mere eye-blink of time, set against all those long dark ages behind it, it changed, utterly and completely, and forever. The lights came. And the old night, the deep and layered and ancient night we have walked through together, began quietly, and then swiftly, to dissolve away. It began in the great cities, a little more than 200 years ago, with a wonder that seemed very nearly unnatural to those who first stood and beheld it. The lighting of whole streets with gas, where before there had been only the hung lantern, and the link boy's torch, and the small scattered pools of candlelight, now, quite suddenly whole long streets could be strung end to end, with lamps that burned a steady, bright, unwavering flame the whole night through, fed by pipes laid down beneath the very stones of the road. A cool, clear light far brighter and far steadier than any candle had ever given, marching away in a line of glowing globes down the street and into the dark. People came out simply to marvel at it, to walk beneath the new lights and stare and wonder, for no one then living had ever in all their days seen the like of it. A public street held bright against the whole night, hour upon hour, as though a piece of the day itself had somehow been kept back, and pinned up and made to shine against the dark. It was thought a marvel, and by some it was thought unnatural too, and faintly unsettling. This bold pushing back of the night that had always, from the beginning of the world, owned the dark hours utterly and without question. But marvel or unease it spread, from city to city and street to street, and for the first time in the whole long story of humankind, there began to be places upon the earth where the night no longer wholly and truly fell. And then, within only a few more short generations, came the very greatest wonder of them all, the one that finished clean what the gas had begun, and swept the last of the old dark away like so much dust before a broom, the electric light. A clean, bright, steady, tireless light, with no flame to it, and no smoke, and no smell, and no guttering. A light that needed no snuffing and no trimming and no tending of any kind. A light that would never set the house afire, that could be made as small and soft as a flower bud, or as bright as a little captured sun, and that came and went, not with the slow patient striking of flint upon steel, or the careful touching of a taper to a wick, but instantly, and wholly, and completely, at the merest idle flick of one small switch upon the wall. Think, only think, what that little switch truly meant, set against the whole of the long story we have travelled through tonight, against the flint and the steel and the shower of struck sparks, against the banked and treasured coals kept living through the night, against the rushlight gathered from the summer ditch, and the tallow candle counted and hoarded and watched, against the deep and total dark that had come down whole every single night over all the sleeping world since the very beginning. Now a person had only to reach out one hand in the dark and touch a switch, and the darkness simply fled, the whole room leaping up all at once into a light as bright as noonday, and held there, steady and effortless, as long as ever one wished, for the smallest cost and the very least thought, and then gone again in an instant at another idle touch. The one thing that the whole of humankind had longed for, and laboured toward, and dreamed of, since the first small fire was kindled in the mouth of the first dark cave, light, cheap and bright and endless, holding back the whole night at will, was suddenly and quietly, simply there, in every hand, for the asking. The dark had been conquered. The long, slow war with the night, 10,000 generations old and older, was at very last won, and with that victory, swiftly and almost wholly unnoticed, the entire ancient shape of the night quietly came apart and dissolved away. For once the evening could be lit up as bright as the day, cheaply and endlessly and at a touch, there was no longer any reason left in the world to go down to bed with the setting of the sun, and so bedtime slid later, and later, and later still, the bright-lit evening stretching on and on into the long hours that had always before belonged wholly to the dark and to sleep. And as the hours that people now spent asleep grew fewer and shorter, squeezed hard from the front by that long bright waking evening, and squeezed just as hard from the back by the fixed and unforgiving hour of the morning's work, the old two-part sleep, the first sleep and the second with the gentle watch set between them, was slowly, quietly squeezed right out of existence. There was no longer any room left in the shortened night for 2 full sleeps and a waking hour besides. The whole of the night must now be used for sleeping, packed down tight into one solid, unbroken block, and any waking in the middle of it became no longer the natural and looked-for old watch, but a trouble, an intrusion, a failure, the very thing we now call by that anxious name, insomnia, and dread, and reach for our remedies against, and lie awake in the dark, fretting bitterly over. The soft waking hour that had once been a still and gentle island in the very middle of the night became instead a thing to be feared and fought. And so, within only a few short generations, quietly, and without anyone ever quite deciding that it should be so, the human race changed the very way in which it slept, from the old layered night of 2 sleeps and a watch between, to the single hard unbroken block of modern sleep that we now simply take to be the one natural way, and can no longer even imagine ever having been otherwise. The change was so swift and so complete that the very memory of the older way vanished almost entirely from the earth, and had to be patiently dug up again, long afterward, out of the dust and the silence of the old forgotten books. And we should not, tonight, be too quick to mourn it, nor too quick to cheer it either, for it was like all the very greatest of changes, both a great gaining and a quiet losing, both at once and together, and far too large and deep a thing to be weighed out on any simple scale. Think of all that the light has given us, and freely, the conquest of the killing dark, and of so much of its old danger and its old fear, the freedom to work, to read, to gather, to make, to live, through all those long hours that were once utterly lost and drowned in blackness. The safety of the lit street, the ease and cheer of the lit home, the lifting at last of that ancient nightly dread of the dark. We would not, most of us, if we are honest, truly wish to give it all back, to return to the flint and the rushlight, and the whole black moonless dark, and the deadly bitter cold of the fireless upper room. And yet, something did quietly slip away in that great rising flood of light. Something small and real and worth the gentle remembering, the deep and true dark, that we now must journey far and wide even to find. The blazing crowded stars that most souls now alive have never even once beheld in their full and proper glory. The old easy friendship with the moon, the old closeness to our dreams, and that soft, peaceful, unhurried waking hour set in the very middle of the night, the watch, the still island between the sleeps, when a person lay quiet and warm in the dark with all the room in the world for prayer, and thought and love and rest, and no clock anywhere ticking, and no alarm set, and no fear. That above all, we have very nearly lost. The light gave us the whole of the bright evening, and took from us, in quiet and unnoticed exchange, the whole of the deep old night, and most of us have lived and died without ever once knowing that the trade was even made. And yet, and this is the soft last thought that I should like to lay gently in your mind now, as the long story winds down toward its close and your own first sleep draws near, that older night is perhaps not so wholly and finally lost as all of that. It has not truly vanished from the earth. It has only gone quiet, and slipped down out of our sight, and it waits, still, somewhere far down beneath the bright and hurried surface of our modern nights, folded deep into the old animal body that we carry still with us out of all those thousands upon thousands of dark years, the body that remembers, even now, even in you, a night far older and far deeper than the electric one it lives in. For have you never woken, yourself, in the deep of the night, some 2 or 3 or 4 hours after you first went down, and lain there a while in the quiet dark for no reason that you could ever name, awake and still in the small hours, before sleep at last came stealing softly back to gather you up and carry you on until the morning. A great many people do. It is one of the commonest things in all the world. And when this was looked into, gently and carefully, by those who make a study of such matters, they found something rather wonderful. They found that when people are taken right away from our bright artificial evenings and given back, night after night, the long true dark of the older world, real darkness, and plenty of it, with no lamp at all to hold it off, their sleep, entirely of its own accord, with no one teaching it or asking it or urging it to, begins, softly, to divide itself again. It breaks once more into a first sleep and a second sleep, with a calm and wakeful hour opening quietly up between them. The old watch, the old shape, the old rhythm, rising back up out of the deep body the very moment that the long dark is handed back to it. The old way was never truly bred or driven out of us, you see. It was only covered over by the light, smothered down and hidden away, exactly as the glowing coals were smothered down and hidden beneath their soft grey blanket of ash, banked, but never for one moment put out, and it lies there still, deep down within you, that older and gentler shape of the night, that ancient and patient rhythm of rest, waiting only, and always, for the dark to call it back up again. So if you should wake tonight, in the small hours, in the dark, remember this, and take a quiet comfort from it. You are not broken, and nothing at all is wrong. You are only an old creature of the old night, doing the oldest and the most natural thing there is, keeping, without ever once having been taught it, the very same watch that your forebears kept faithfully every single night of their lives. You may lie quiet and warm, exactly as they lay, and let that still hour simply be whatever it is, and ask nothing at all of it, and fear nothing whatever in it, and wait in perfect and easy trust for the second sleep to come and find you. It is not some curse that has been laid upon you. It is an inheritance handed gently down. It is the deep old night itself, living in you still, keeping faith still with all the long dark centuries that shaped and made you. And it can be, if only you will let it be, one of the most peaceful hours in the whole slow turning of the day and the night. But all of that is for later, if it comes at all. And for now there is only this, the warm bed, and the gathering dark, and the slow soft coming on of your own first sleep. So let us lay the long story down now, gently, and let you go down along with it into rest. Let your body grow heavy, all the way through and down, the way those old and weary bodies grew heavy in their heaped and curtained beds after the long day's honest labour. Let your breath come slow, and then more slowly still. Let the whole day, the whole bright, hurried, lit-up modern day, slip quietly away from you and grow dim and small and far, the way the whole world grew dim and dissolved and vanished each evening of the old time, when the sun went down and the last small flame was pinched softly out, and the great old kindly dark came down once more over everything there was. Imagine, if it should soothe you, that you are lying now in one of those old warm beds, deep in the deep heart of the vanished night. The fire is banked to its soft red glow upon the hearth. The heavy door is barred. The wool lies heaped warm and deep and weighty over you, and the ones that you love are close beside you, breathing slow and soft in the dark. Outside, far off, The watchman calls the hour and tells you gently that all is well, and a single church bell rolls its slow deep note across the sleeping fields. And the rain begins to whisper and to patter on the roof close overhead, and the whole snug old house creaks quietly and settles and grows still around you. There is nothing at all to do. There is nowhere at all to be. The night is long and dark and deep, and there is room enough and to spare in it for all the sleep that you could ever need, a first sleep and a peaceful waking, and a second sleep to follow, and the morning waiting, patient and unhurried and sure, at the far quiet end of it all. The dark is old, and it is kind, and it has cradled sleeping souls exactly like you every single night since the very beginning of the world, and it will cradle you now. So let it hold you. Let yourself sink all the way down into the warm dark, slowly and softly, and without the least fear, just the way that they did, with nothing left now to trouble you, and nothing left to do, and nothing left at all to hold on to. The fire is banked, the door is barred, the watch is set and walking. The night will keep you, as it has always kept its own, and carry you gently down through the first sleep, and through the quiet watch, and through the second sleep, and on into the morning, and there is nothing whatever left for you to do now, nothing in all the world but to rest. Sleep now. Rest well. The long dark night is yours, just as it was always theirs, and it asks nothing at all of you but that you lie down in it, and let it hold you close. And whenever you should find yourself here again, in the quiet, in the dark, in need of a little peace and an old gentle story to carry you down into sleep, the fire at the Calm Archive will be burning low, and there will always be a place kept warm for you beside it. Good night.